Okay. Hi, geniuses. Welcome back to today's episode of the Female Genius Podcast. Today is a very exciting episode because we have our first official guest. I know we had my sister on a Footnotes episode a month ago, but this is proper. It's official. It's not me asking my sister on a random Saturday, here's the mic, bro. We're going to talk. Guys, this episode, so interesting, so full of gems. Charlotte is so well spoken. We tackle things like what does body image mean, the psychology behind body image, and we also tackle very topical things and issues as well, such as Ozempic and her opinions about that. And it's just an amazing episode for anybody who just wants to learn about this field, is kind of interested, or for anybody that doesn't understand it or has somebody in their life struggling with it. I think this episode is so... I'm not being biased, but this episode is really, really good. Dr. Charlotte Markey is a body image scientist, having studied body image and eating behaviors for nearly 3 decades. She's passionate about understanding how to help people have a healthy relationship with their body and food. Charlotte is a psychology professor at Rutgers University and a research scientist who has published over 100 scholarly articles and chapters about health issues. Dr. Markey is also a book author, having most recently published the Body Image book series. So the Body Image book for girls in 2020, the Body Image book for boys in 2022, and Adultish, the Body Image book for life in 2024, which is her most recent book. She also recently co-edited the 3-volume Encyclopedia of Mental Health. She writes regularly for news outlets such as Psychology Today and is often interviewed for TV, news articles, and podcasts, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and NBC. So, without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. A very quick disclaimer is that this is my very first interview. Charlotte lives in America, so we did the interview over Zoom. While the audio quality is impeccable, as it always is on the Female Genius podcast, I take audio so seriously on this podcast. Generally, the first episode is the last time you will ever hear bad audio. Other than that, every time the audio is sharp, it's clean. But if you are watching on YouTube or potentially on TikTok, one of the TikTok shorts, or are watching the video version on Spotify, yes, the video quality might be a little bit off, but the content of the podcast is so amazing and the audio quality is just as amazing. And I really think this is an episode that everybody should sit down and listen to and enjoy. So without further ado, welcome geniuses to today's episode of the Female Genius Podcast.
Female Genius.
Okay, I guess my first initial question is, you've done body image book for girls, body image book for boys, which I do have actually. I gave the body image book for girls that I received to my little cousin, and she's 10 now, and she absolutely loves it. It's so amazing. But I guess my question is, what compelled you to now write a book for young adults after those first 2 books?
So we know that the late teen and early adult years are a vulnerable time for many people in terms of mental health. And we also know that many young people during this time of life are moving away from family, maybe going to university or living on their own. And so they don't have the same support and resources always. So there's this unfortunate combination of there's a biological vulnerability in terms of mental health issues emerging, and there's also sometimes some social changes that may be challenging. And Adultish is, inherently it's a body image book, but it really, I think, covers all sorts of mental and physical health issues pertaining to this time of life. And body image is just sort of a theme that helps weave it all together.
Okay, that sounds very cool. And I can attest, you kind of, when I was 15, 16, 17, I would think okay, by the time I'm in my 20s, I should have understood my body, loved my body, I should have sorted everything out. And now I'm here and it's still as confusing, sometimes maybe even worse than ever. I'm very curious, actually, from a scientific perspective, how do you actually define body image?
So I really use a very broad definition of body image. So I think for many years in the research world, we'd say that body image is how you think and feel about your body. But that really suggests that this is just something that's very superficial, which I do not believe it is, as someone who's done decades of research in this area. So I think of body image as a core component of identity and really how comfortable are we in our own skin. So there is a physical piece to this, but there is more importantly, I think a psychological piece. How comfortable are we with ourselves? And this affects our relationships, our health behaviors, and it's very much linked to mental health, including anxiety, depression, substance use, and of course, eating disorders.
Yeah, of course. And also another question just to follow up on that, which I'm so intrigued by, is obviously there is sometimes a disconnect between how scientists and psychologists perceive a word that is supposedly as simple as body image and society and how it perceives it. Do you think that the way that we define body image in society is incorrect, and how do you think it affects the way that we then tackle it? Do you think there's an issue there?
I think there's a little bit of an issue in both the research literature and in popular culture, and that I do think that the emphasis is all too often placed on the superficial, or placed on like, you like your hair, right? And yet there's just much more to it than that. It's much more nuanced. It's much more complex. It really is, I think, a much broader psychological construct. And part of how this is apparent is that in a lot of the cultural messaging about body image, the solutions for body dissatisfaction are very much about changing your appearance, right? Like if you don't like your hair, then cut it, right? If you don't like your nose, then get surgery. And yet those solutions are usually not long-term solutions for repairing body dissatisfaction. So I think that there is sort of a misunderstanding in terms of just how important body image is and how much it affects different areas of our lives.
Completely agree. I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of body positivity versus body neutrality, because I feel like in terms of the way social media or people on social media have decided is the best way to tackle it, which is fair enough, like in their own gain, is you have to love your body as much as possible in every kind of way. And you need to find a way to be as positive as possible. And the first time I actually ever discovered the phrase body neutrality is when I interviewed you the first time all those years ago. And I was like, that feels like it makes more sense to me. So for the people listening who aren't really sure what body neutrality is, or the difference between body positivity and body neutrality, could you potentially explain that to us?
Yeah. So body positivity usually refers to, at the most general sense, feeling positively about one's body, right? And a certain degree of self-love. It was never ever really a term that was intended to mean that you feel positively all the time, or that you love yourself and everything about yourself all the time, right? And that's important because when we talk about body neutrality, the focus is much more on acceptance and contentment and self-respect and self-compassion. And all of those are very, very important, but many people believe that they are actually components of body positivity, right? So that these are not like polar opposites. It's not like you can just do one or the other necessarily. I think, body neutrality is a good place for a lot of people to start to think about just feeling less negative about yourself, to try to focus on some aspects of who you are that you want to celebrate or at least just feel accepting of. But, as a psychologist, I guess I don't want people just to stop with neutral, right? And I think a good analogy can be comparing this to like depression versus happiness, right? So if you're dealing with a depressed person, you might suggest to them that they just try to feel less negative, right? Like maybe feeling really happy or overjoyed feels too hard, and feeling less negative is a good starting point. Okay, well, what are some things you do have to live for that you do feel accepting of that, bring you some satisfaction, right? But then again, as a psychologist, I don't want people really just to kind of stop there, right? I want there to be some joy in life for everyone. And so it's not about just not being sad or not being dissatisfied with our bodies. It's also about sometimes experiencing pleasure and joy. And it's not normal even to expect to experience those positive emotions all the time, right? Because we react to our everyday experiences, and our everyday experiences are not all positive. But it's really about having the capacity for those things and trying to nurture those positive experiences.
So I feel like, especially me personally, and I'm going to be a bit selfish at this point, I'm going to ask, like, something that I have definitely been struggling with is this idea of feeling guilt for eating something bad or not doing exercise, or, if I haven't gone to the gym for 3 days, I'm like, right, so I can't have carbs per se. Do you see what I mean? Like that level of guilt. And it doesn't mean that I'm not currently happy with my body, but I do understand that my relationship with food is quite negative. My perception of it is quite negative. So do you think there is a more healthy approach or way to go about that? Are there better alternatives to finding this balance between I accept my body as it is, but there's loads of things I want to change about my body, but then also I love food, but I also feel guilty for eating food, and all of these messagings coming into my brain? Are there better ways to cope with it?
I mean, I think what you're describing is just the contradictions that many people feel. And so I think an important first step is to appreciate that, one, this is incredibly common, and two, it's really, encouraged by our culture in many ways, right? Because the advertising and social media and just regular media we see often encourages these sort of contradictory themes, right? Like indulge, love yourself, right? You don't have to do these things. Oh no, but now you need to control yourself and now you're bad. And right, it can be very confusing to know how to think about these issues, and they're deeply personal, right? And that's why I always say body image is part of our identity, because when our body image is off, when we feel dissatisfied, it's not just this minor thing. It can impact everything else, and it takes up all this mental space. And what you've described is sort of the beginning of like those thoughts that can lead to a spiral so very easily, right? Where people are feeling like, okay, I'm too tired to go to the gym, but then am I bad if I don't? And, I think a lot of it is that we're sort of forced, it feels like, to choose between extremes, right? Like we're good, we're bad, we're doing this, we're not doing that. And I think that once we accept that there is middle ground and that none of this makes us a bad person, these are not moral choices. We're not talking about harming people or doing anything that is morally problematic, then I think it becomes easier to think in less extreme ways. And as we think in less extreme ways, we can be more compassionate towards ourselves and say like, okay, listen, I have a really busy work schedule right now. So I'm going to try to do, exercise 2 days a week. Maybe I'm going to go to a class that I like with a friend so that it's also a social outing. And that's it. That's all I can do right now. Right. And just sort of accept that and try to enjoy then the activity we do participate in instead of feeling like guilt that we're not doing more. Right. Does that make some sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. I think operating from a place of compassion, I think that's in every case in life. When you fail an exam, when you miss the bus because you decided to sleep in, but like there's always a layer of compassion, I think, that needs to bleed into just a reminder that you're being human for the first time. Like this is the first time you're ever doing this. And so you're never going to get everything 100%. No, I completely agree.
And often what I just try to tell myself, and this is as someone who thinks about these topics all the time and has done this work for a very long time, I will just tell myself almost every day, sometimes I think, like, you're doing your best. That's all you can do. You are doing your best. And that's not to excuse myself if I do something terribly wrong, which I still do. But, for the lapses that I know are not logically actual lapses, right? Because again, there's nothing morally wrong with skipping a day of exercise or, really wanting some sweet dessert because you're tired and that's just what you're craving or you're sad, right? So, you just sometimes I think have to say to yourself, I'm doing the best I can and I'm going to keep doing that. And then try not to dwell on the negative, because I think it really prohibits the kind of growth most of us want in our lives, right? Where we're allowed to grow and strive and change and and feel joy, and excitement. And some of that comes from allowing ourselves to be challenged.
I think another thing I'm very intrigued by, because after I gifted my little cousin this book and she started going through it, it encouraged and incited a lot of very healthy conversations where it was like, actually, my mom sometimes would point out aspects of my weight that I don't like. How do I approach this? And as I come into adulthood, it feels very weird to say that because in my head I'm an adult, but at the same time I feel like a child, but adultish basically. As I feel very in my adultish era, I recognize that some of the things that my parents, not saying that they didn't try their best, but some of the language they may have used or the way they taught me about food or my relationship with food was encouraged in a way by the way my parents were. So I'm very curious about how, from your perspective as a psychologist and somebody who studied this, how much of an impact does the language your parents use, how your parents treat you in terms of your relationship with your body, impact you in your adult life?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, none of us come into this world dissatisfied with our bodies, right? And then those concerns emerge from somewhere. And most of our first years are spent with our family, right? Or the people who are caring for us. And so how they talk about bodies and how they talk about food is how we learn to talk about bodies and food. And as you said, I think most parents truly are doing their best. And they do not mean to encourage any of us to have a negative relationship with our body or food. But in some of the things they say and do, they may, in fact, help to create problems in terms of how we think about these issues. But as we become older, I do think we have to be careful not to, blame our parents or blame social media. Of course, all those, social factors have a role, but we need to also, I think, take responsibility for ourselves and think about, okay, now I'm adultish, now I'm a grown-up, or I'm trying to be a grown-up. How do I think through this on my own, right? Because, even if you want to blame other influences, that doesn't fix anything, right? In order to feel better, in order to get to where you want to be in terms of a psychologically healthy and hopefully happy person, blaming people is just not going to get you very far. So at some point then, I think it's about educating ourselves, deciding what we want for ourselves. And there's a lot of good information out there too, right? I think our understanding of these issues has really evolved in the last 20 years or so. And I can still remember when I was a graduate student, so this would have been the late 90s, probably before you were born. And I can remember doing a focus group of mothers, and they had pre-adolescent daughters. And I can remember them talking, these moms, about how, they were just helping their daughters learn how to diet because they were going to have to do this for the rest of their lives. So they should just help them learn how to do this now. And that really stuck with me. That one focus group, I can still remember it because I remember at the time I didn't really disagree with them. I sort of thought like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like the reality of most women's experiences. And it's amazing to me to see how, I guess, I've evolved as a scholar, how a lot of other scholarship around these topics has evolved, how a lot of the popular discourse has really improved, I think. And I don't know many people who would say now, yeah, just, you got to learn how to diet at 12. It's a lifelong pursuit, right? Instead, we see a lot of people recognizing how deeply problematic that is, how ineffective it is, how psychologically damaging it can be. So I do think that the conversation keeps improving, and it's informed by more and more data and by more and more social discourse that's really trying to parse some really challenging issues.
Yeah, a large part of becoming an adult, I'm painfully discovering, is you kind of have to deal with everything, not by yourself, but a lot of the issues. There's nobody to be like, it's your fault, fix it now, because it's your own life. And 100%. I think one thing that I'm very curious of, And I'm always every time I meet a scientist or another person who studies or is in research, I'm always very curious about the communication of science. And something like body image, and especially in your books, it has to be communicated empathetically and delicately, but as accurately as possible, so somebody gains a lot. How did you go about the task of doing this?
Yeah, I love that question. And I love thinking about this issue. And it's something that I think about probably more than most scientists because of these books I've written and because I've written a lot of articles for sort of the general public. And it's tricky because I often will have conversations with editors where they will want me to take out some of the sort of, cautionary language. Like I'll say, it may be that this happens sometimes, right? And editors will be like, well, just say that's what happens. Like, no, I can't because, we don't know that for sure. That's not what the research says for sure. And it can be very frustrating to reporters who are used to talking in more absolutes. And that's just sexier, right? To be like, if you go to the gym every day, you're going to lose 10 pounds. Like that's the kind of clear-cut message people want to hear. And yet life is just not that clear-cut. And so I think especially in writing for young kids, tweens who are, again, like the target readership for the body image book for girls and the body image book for boys is like a 12-year-old. So I was fortunate when I was working on those books to have my own children be in that age range. And so I had them and friends of theirs around. I was used to, I think, interacting with people of that age. I also did a lot of focus grouping with the book chapters, had young people read them and let me know what they thought, if they understood it, if it was too simplistic, if they wanted more information. But there is a real balance. And every now and then, I have gotten some critiques of the boys and girls books that like I didn't cover something in enough depth, right? Or what you need to explain this more thoroughly. And I'm like, well, but these are trade-offs you have to take sometimes, because if you want a 12-year-old to keep paying attention and understand it, you can't go into all the detail, right? So I just think it's, life is about trade-offs, right? Conveying science is about trade-offs. It's about trying to figure out sort of, how you can be as accurate and as detailed and as nuanced as possible while not losing, your reader and your audience.
I think it's very easy to find negatives in everything, or like, see, this is something that could have been better, but I think I applaud you in the sense that when I read these books and when I read it with my little cousin at the time, I was like, this incites so much important conversation. And the fact that you did focus groups and you were trying to be as intentional as possible, I think it's so beautiful. And I think you did an amazing job, just from my personal opinion. And I'm sure many people share that opinion as well. I think another thing that comes when reading this book, and I'm sure when I get my hands on Adultish in the UK, 26th of September, it's in my head now, that there's a level of vulnerability, because I know you mentioned, and it's in the other books, that you interview people and you get case studies from people's lives and experiences. Is there anything in the Adultish books or anybody's stories that just sticks out to you and is the most compelling to you?
Honestly, I have such great stories in Adultish, and in some ways I regret that I've been calling them stories across all the books, because they're not fictional, of course. They're real people's experiences, and I don't ever want to make them sound trivial by calling them stories. But, I just had such a range of amazing people. More people from different countries, especially the UK, are featured in Adultish. The first story in the book is one of my former students, and I made it the first story because I think so many elements of it really resonated with me, and I think will resonate with readers, and that she didn't have any really severely negative experiences, but just was thoughtful about her body image and eating experiences as a teenager and young adult. And she talks about sort of butting heads with her mom about these issues and how some of the comments her mom makes, we were just talking about parents, right, do really deeply impact her. And she has to kind of figure out how to recover from that in her early adulthood. And I think that's just such an important story. And the last story in the book is such a positive, uplifting story. Someone who now works in the field of eating disorder treatment and had an eating disorder and had just spent so much of her life so upset and dissatisfied with her body, and had really learned how to have a complete appreciation for herself. And so that's a really uplifting story at the end. But there's just, a really wide range. And this actually leads me to think, I had meant to say earlier, that I'm actually revising the body image book for girls right now, and I'm updating it. So there'll be a new version out, hopefully in 2025. Maybe we can talk again then. And one of the main things I wanted to include in the revision is just more of the stories, because people love the stories. I think they're really important, and I wanted to get a more diverse representation in the stories for the girls' book. So I've been interviewing younger girls, early adults, but mostly like late teens for that book. And again, just, it's amazing. It takes a lot of courage to share some of this, I think. And like you said, people are really vulnerable in sharing all of this. But I also think that, especially the girls and women I've talked with, they just feel like this is important and we shouldn't be alone with this. We should share this so that we can help other people. And it's just really inspiring to see that.
I can't wait to be able to read some of the stories. I think people's stories have the biggest impact on people's lives, because you can always talk about the hypotheticals and you can always talk about this is what the research says, but hearing somebody's life and their experience will always have the most profound impact because it feels the most real. And one thing I'm very curious about in terms of body image, and I think this wasn't very topical when we spoke last time, but it has now become very topical, is the topic of weight loss drugs. And I've read, I think, a couple research papers, and I'm very fascinated about articles about this because it's something very new and it's very complex and it's a hot topic. And I'm just curious about your perspective as somebody who works in the field of body image, especially. How do you think that the potential commercialization of weight loss drugs, like being able to pop into your local drugstore and pick up a weight loss drug, how do you think that is going to affect body image in the next coming years, specifically with young adults and teens as well?
Yeah, I find all of this so fascinating. I just read everything I can find practically about it and listen to people's podcasts. And it's just been incredible how much this has changed in the last couple of years, right? It's just so fascinating to me. And it's also troubling, I have to say, because right now you can't just pop into a drugstore and get these medications. They're very expensive for the most part. There's been a shortage in a lot of places. And so they're not particularly accessible because of the cost and the shortage. But we anticipate that will change in time, right? So as that changes, maybe you have the option of just popping in and trying these. And what would stop people from doing that, right? It feels almost like this holy grail, like people have wanted a pill to help them, lose weight and have the body they think they want or need. And it also should be noted that there is not a pill form at this time, right? So an injection is a little less appealing to most people than a pill. But I'm sure that it's a matter of time before we also have like a pill form. But I think what we really don't know yet is, will this actually improve body image? Because there are real limits in terms of the efficacy of this medication. So much of the discussion focuses on, yes, it seems to really promote weight loss, but we're talking about, 10, maybe 15% of body weight that is lost. And for some people, that may be really a lot, and it may lead them to feel differently about their bodies or even more positively. For a lot of people, that's not going to change their lived experience very much. And I think the other part that hasn't gotten the attention it needs quite yet is the side effects of the medications. For a lot of people, the side effects are really debilitating. So it's just really unlikely that staying on the medications is going to work, I think, for the majority of people who might be interested in taking them. And we know, I think the data so far are very clear that if you go off the medication, people regain the weight they've lost. So this has to be viewed as an intervention that people try, and then for it to be quote unquote effective, you stick with it. But we don't really know also long term what the side effects will be, right? So even if the nausea or gastrointestinal side effects, some people report feeling hungry and full at the same time, and having some really confusing sorts of physical and psychological responses to how the medication operates on both the gut and the brain. Even if people can tolerate all of that, which doesn't sound great to me, frankly, we still don't know if you're on this medication for 10 or 20 years, what that really does to us physically or psychologically. So I think there's a lot we don't know. I think that's something to really be cautious and concerned about. And I think we really don't know yet that the body image effects will be as people anticipate. Maybe there's, discussion like, oh, we don't need to accept ourselves anymore. We can just take a pill someday and change ourselves. It's just not going to be that simple, right? I mean, because even right now, we know from cosmetic surgery research that people often think, oh, I don't like this about myself, I can change it. And they do change it surgically, but it doesn't always improve body image. So, I think it's fascinating, and just time will tell.
I think this emphasizes the importance of really trying to understand body image from a psychological perspective and to tackle it from yourself, because there's proven time and time again that people will change things that they feel like they don't like, and then they'll find something else, and then they'll find something else. So really and truly, it doesn't actually matter about the thing you want to change. It's about you and how you view your body and the importance of body image in itself.
Yeah. Some body image researchers use a phrase, something like, body image is an inside job, right? So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that it really is more psychological. And this idea of quick fixes, it's just not clear that's going to really solve the problems for most people.
Okay, thank you so much. We're really quickly running out of time. I don't know how time has flown that fast. My final question is, because the podcast is called Female Genius, and I'm very inspired by all the amazing women, people who identify as women and all the things they do. Is there anybody that our listeners, any women or anybody who identifies as women, who you think people need to go out and read or listen to or go find out more about? Who is your personal female genius?
Oh, gosh. There's so many. There are, so many people who I really admire in my own field and just in general. Molly Forbes, who's from the UK, does a ton of body image work, and I think she's really amazing. I've just read Joanne Finkelstein's book, who focuses more on feminism. She's from the US, and that was, I thought, just a really great read. I could just really, I've realized recently I could almost do like a book podcast, because I always do have recommendations of people who have written other great things. And trying to think what else I read recently. Even just thinking about like Peggy Orenstein's work on sexuality has been just such important work for the field of psychology, but more broadly for our understanding of gender, sex, identity. So those are just a few, but I could go on, I'm sure. And I think too, it's whatever resonates with you when you're looking for information. It's important that you're looking for evidence-based information, and that the people writing it have some qualifications. But in terms of the topic, and in terms of where you get your information, that is somewhat personal, I think.
Just start a body image newsletter with all of your book recommendations that you have every month. I'm sure I'll be like writing them down, like being like, okay, I've got to get this done.
Well, I do have a Substack, and I try to write something every month, and it's called Body Talk on Substack. And but that's a good idea. I should talk about other people's books because sometimes I feel like I've been doing this work for so long. I'm like, I feel like I've talked about all of this 20 million times. But it would be a nice place to then feature some of the new books other people have also. I'm sure people get tired of hearing about my books from me. So
I mean, I'm not tired, and I'm sure after listening to this podcast, everybody else will be so thoroughly entertained because I love this conversation. I remember telling my friend, I was like, I'm so excited for today because I loved the last conversation and I love this one even more. So thank you. Before we run out of time, I just want to say my gratitude. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, for talking to little old me and like participating in this discussion. Like I'm beyond grateful, honestly.
no, I love this theme for your podcast, and I'm so glad you're still doing this. I remember you were a student when we talked last time, and I thought, God, she just sounds so smart and wise beyond her years. I totally remembered you when we got back in touch. So I'm glad you reached out, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk again, that you'll still be doing this and I'll still be doing this, and we can chat again.
Female genius.
Guys, I hope you guys had a pen. That was like such a good episode. I think body image is something I've always struggled with. I think that subconsciously, while I really try my best to de-sentiment. Like, I really try my best to approach my life with like male gaze is not that important to me, and it's not, to be honest. And like, but I do think subconsciously, honestly, and a lot of girls are like this, that I will subconsciously always view my body as an object of desire for men. And the way I treat my body or the way I observe my body is like observing my body through the lens of what I think a man will observe my body and how they would feel about my body in a sexual context. And that is something that I've had to speak and knock out of my brain. I think, okay, this isn't the most like PG thing ever, but I remember seeing a quote where it was like, the attention and the desire of men in a sexual context isn't as valuable as you think it is because even dead people get it. Although I also think I'm asexual. I'm aromantic. I did a BuzzFeed quiz once and everybody's laughing at me, but I genuinely think it's so true. I feel like once I clocked like 21, I was like, I actually don't like, ugh. Don't talk to me. Don't look at me. Ugh. Trying to find out where your body image comes from. Where does your perception come from? And a lot of times our body image and the way it's shaped or formed, like Charlotte said, comes from outside of us. It comes from society. It comes from the media consumed, and it comes from the people we talk to. And a lot of time we view ourselves how we think other people view us. And that's most of the time always warped and not the most positive thing. And so, yeah, I encourage you guys after today's episode to spend some time thinking about, how do I view my body? How can I be more kind to my body? How can I be more empathetic? Please go and pick up Charlotte's book, Adultish, the body image book. It is available in America, and I think it comes out in the UK and Ireland and in Europe, September the 26th. So I will be sat when it comes out. Will you be sat? I just think there's so many valuable things to say that. Anyway, geniuses, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you guys next week. Guys, next week. I know you guys have missed it, okay? I've been getting DMs and messages from people being like, I've finished all your book recommendations from the last book club episode, I've read Akata, I've read The Naturals, I've read Creativity Inc. I need another book club episode. And guys, what kind of podcast host would I be if I didn't give you guys what you wanted? So of course, guys, next week episode, get your pen, get your papers out because it's book club time.
Female genius.